I want to ask you a question this morning. Why are you living? Now, I'm asking, why am I living? Now, I say that because I don't want you to think it's about me. You say, well, I don't know why you're living, so let's close the lesson. No, I'm asking you to ask yourself that. Why am I, you, me? Why am I living? If you're a very young person and you can understand the fact that you exist and you're thinking about realities of life and God, and you're thinking about your future, I think it's a great question for you to ask yourself. Why am I here? Why am I alive? Other than the fact my parents loved me, and they had me, and here I am. That's a very good question to have answered this morning. You're in the middle of your life and you're making your plans for the future and you're looking at what you've done and what you've accomplished and you wonder, is it all there is to life? And you might ask yourself the question of what is all the purpose of life? Why am I living? You may be an older person and you might add a word there, why am I still living? You've been here a long time. And you begin to say, why am I still here? That's a good question. And the lesson that I have is very simple. It is very direct, but it includes all people, all different ages. Wherever you are at this time in your life, you can benefit by listening to the Word of God and ask the question, and we're going to answer that. And one that ought to come to your mind is the fact that, well, let's look at the very beginning. When man was created, God says, I will create man in my own image. And He did that in verse 27. He created man in His own image. He created male and female. So whether you're a man or a woman, and you don't have to wonder who you are, we know who we are. Men, women, male, female. We're all made in the image of God. We were created in the image of God. Your pet parakeet, your goldfish, your dog, your cat was not created in the image of God. You as a person that can reason and think and have that moral compass called the conscience to sit in judgment upon all that you do. We have been created. What purpose? Isaiah 43:7, as he brings in the people that were called by his name, the Israelites. But he also says, all those who have been created to glorify me. So the overriding purpose of living, whether we have become a Christian or not, one of the overriding purpose is the fact that we're here to glorify God. And when we begin to see that come about, we realize that I come to a certain age where I am responsible for my actions before God, and every one of us have failed to do the purpose we were here to do. Paul says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So we all can say, well, we're failures. There's no hope for us. But we're standing and living this moment, asking this important question, realizing indeed that God is long-suffering, and we begin to think about His grace and we think about His mercy. Even though we sinned and the wages we deserve is death, Romans 6:23, what we observe is that, well, is there hope? Is there something that's important to do? Is that, well, you need to be redeemed from your sins. And so we begin to realize that we've been redeemed from our sins, and we'll talk a little bit later about when that occurs. But let's say I've been redeemed now. I am a Christian. Does glorifying God, is that no longer needed because I glorify God? I accepted His Son as my personal Savior. I obeyed the teachings of the gospel, so now that I am a Christian, does it stop there? No, it's just intensified. It's intensified. And so we go to 1 Corinthians 10 and 31 and see the broad, encompassing statement about our life. Whether we eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. How broad is it? Whatsoever you do. Some of it, do all. All that you do is to the glory of God. This passage has a context to Christians. And while we're asking the question, why am I living? Here's a question that takes place because, see, there was indeed Gentiles and they offered up meat and sacrifice to their idol. And they were partaking of that meat, partaking of that altar to a false god. And Christians are not going to have a part of that. And so what do we do when we're invited to eat at someone's house that's a pagan? Not go? No. You're to eat the meat that's provided, asking no questions. For conscience sake, that cat and that dog ears wouldn't worry about that. If they liked it, they get it. But you got a conscience. But if they said it's been sacrificed to their gods, you don't eat it. And here's the questions that unfold around verse 31. If any man has said to you, this hath been offered in sacrifice, eat not, for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake. Conscience, I say, not that own, but the others. For why is my liberty judged by another conscience? That's the question. You can talk about why you're living, but why my liberty? Because I can eat all meats. All meats are clean. I'm a Christian. But there were those coming out of idolatry that were still used to that, and you're going to pay attention because glorifying God, that's why he says, whether we eat or drink, whatever we do to the glory of God, because we are going to act in such a way that God will be glorified and that there'll be Christians that are weak because of the lack of time or the lack of knowledge. They're still connecting that meat that's sold in the shambles unto the gods, that you don't do that when they're understanding that's what we're having today. What are you doing? I'm glorifying God by my actions of not eating and drinking when those things are involved with idolatry. But he writes to the same people because fornication was also being practiced in that town. A lot of people had come from that. That was part of worship. That was part of serving God in the pagan, idolatrous world. And so he tells the Christian in verse 18, that which we know, because we're to be holy people, flee fornication. You don't rationalize it. You don't try to just think it through. You flee it. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. What do you mean by that, Paul? Is that the body is being used in the very sin. Of joining yourself sexually with another person. Had no right to. He says that's what's happened. Or know ye not that your body is a temple, a sanctified place for the Holy Spirit, which is in you, which you have from God? You don't belong to yourself. Why? I was redeemed. Yes. I belong to God through Jesus Christ. I belong to the Lord. For ye were bought with a price. Glorify God, therefore, in your body. In our time, which God, we only want to talk about you in the spiritual sense. You have no right over my body. I do. And if I have an unwanted fetus, it's my body. I'll do what I want to do with it. No, you glorify God. It's always the protection of innocent human life. And we see here that I'm not here to satisfy my desires in a way that's contrary to God's will. Because I'm here to glorify God not only spiritually, but all the deeds that I do, even the fact of glorifying God and how I use my body. Isn't it interesting that God cares about your body? He gave you one. And we're not going to remain naked in Hades, just being a spirit departed from a body. What is he going to do? What has he promised? A bodily resurrection. It will be a glorified body to last for eternity, no end. It's a spiritual body. Don't know exactly what it will look like, but it houses our soul, houses our spirit, but it will be a body that is a glorified state, not subject to death, not subject of decay. According to the glory of the Lord's transformed body. And all of those things we look forward to, because body is important to God. Why isn't it important to you? We want to be stewards of our body. We want to do what we can to keep it as healthy as we are living. But I'm here to glorify God, and I've fell short of that. I became a Christian, and now there's a new, enhanced, intensified effort to keep my body and my spirit pure, and to make sure that I glorify you even among brethren that have a weak conscience. And that becomes important. In fact, Paul says, whether I'm living or whether I'm dying, in life or in death, I'm not the one that's going to be magnified. Look at me. No, Christ will be magnified. Because Paul was in prison. He did not know exactly at this time that he would be released. He thought he would be. And with the prayers of the saints, he had confidence that he would be. He felt like he had more work to have done, but he wasn't in control of that. So what he says in verse 19, for I know that this shall turn out to my salvation through your supplication. I think we're going to get out of prison and to supply the Spirit of Christ Jesus according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing shall I be put to shame. What do you mean, you be put to shame? But that in all boldness, I'm going to remain bold always, whether it's dying for Christ or continue to live and do the work of the Lord. Also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. He could courageously go to the beheading sword, if that's the way that he went. He could courageously go and keep preaching the gospel that got him in jail in the first place. He's going to be bold because what drove him is that I know why I'm living. I'm going to magnify Christ, and if it means the point of my death, I will magnify Christ and how I die. That gives a person a lot of courage to not shrink back and run from death, but to embrace it and make sure my departing is connected with God's glory. So, taking you from your cradle to the grave, you need to realize my purpose here is to glorify God. And when you got a hold of that, it'll change your life for the better, for good. But the second major area, and this is all you got to remember today, I'm living to glorify God, and I'm also living to love. ... Love God. Love my fellow man. Love Christians. I live to love. If you turn with me to 1 Peter, the first chapter, I want you to follow with me in verse 18 following that, well, let's these people just became Christians. These people became Christians. And listen to if you can see something that we already saw in the idea of glorifying God. Verse 18 says, knowing that you were redeemed, not with corruptible things, silver and gold, handed down your vain manner of life, but with precious blood, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot, even the blood of Christ. God had foreknown that would take place in redeeming man. Have we just said, you were bought with a price. You were redeemed from sin. Glorify God in your body. So we pick up with the fact, yes, I was redeemed by the blood of Christ, not with money, but with the blood of Christ. When my body was washed with pure water, baptism, He sprinkled my conscience clean by the blood of Christ. That spiritual transaction when my body is purified in baptism, the idea of purifying my soul. And we begin to see that here. But I also realize in verse 21, I'm now a believer in God. I'm a believer in God, not because I studied evolution, I realized that's not true, and I just believe you exist, God. No, it's because of Christ was raised from the dead. I'm a believer of God. What did He do? He raised Him, raised Christ from the dead, and gave His glory, and gave Him glory, so that your faith and your hope might be in God. That's what I mean by being a believer in God. I looked at Christ. And God raised His Son from the dead. That gives me the hope as I live. So I've been redeemed by the blood of Christ. I am now a believer in God through Christ. Verse 22, seeing you have purified your souls and your obedience to the truth. When did I purify my soul in obedience to the truth? The passage that should come to mind is Romans 6 and verse 17, where Paul is describing what the people had done. They were servants of sin, so they weren't out here glorifying God. They were falling short of the glory of God. But something changed. There's a point in which it changed, that they became a servant of righteousness. We notice, but thanks be to God in verse 17, that whereas you were servants of sin, therefore falling short of the glory of God, and that's where you were, in sin, dead in your sins. You weren't glorifying God that way. But no, Christ came. I believe God because He raised Him from the dead. And what does Peter also add to that? You purified your souls in your obedience to the truth. Well, what was it? Thanks be to God that whereas you were servants of sin, you became obedient from the heart to that form or mode of teaching whereunto you were delivered from. What mode did you come into? The death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. That's the gospel that's preached. That's preaching Christ crucified and preaching the resurrection of Christ. Paul would say, I'll remind you of the gospel in 1 Corinthians 15, that He died for our sins. He was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures. God had prophesied that. He foreshadowed that would take place. So we see here I'm a believer in God, and I have obeyed that form or mode of teaching. How do you obey the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ? How does one do that? Romans 6, I'm baptized into His death. I'm buried, therefore, into death, that like as Christ was raised to the glory of the Father, so I also might walk in newness of life. Romans 6, 3 and 4 is connected to Romans 6, 17, where you were obedient to that form of teaching. And now you're a Christian. Now you're a believer in God through Christ. But that's not all. Verse 23, having been begotten again. Not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, through the word of God, which liveth and abideth. And what does he say this is in verse 25? This is the word of good tidings, which is preached unto you. What is the gospel? By definition, it's good news. Now just pause for a moment. Where did I ever read love there in that text? I was redeemed by the blood of Christ. I became a believer in God who raised Jesus from the dead. I purified my soul in my obedience to the truth of the gospel. I obeyed that mold, that form of teaching. And I'm born again. Sound like me getting saved. Sound like you coming to Christ. And the way the scriptures teach, not only believing God, but also believing God to the point I will be buried into his death because I know he was raised from the dead, and I'll walk a newness of life. And yes, it's talking about how I can get right with God so I can start glorifying him from your first point. That's right. But what does he say in the midst of this wonderful plan of God that you are now a part of? In verse 22, he tells you to love. Seeing you have purified your souls in your obedience unto truth, unto unfeigned, genuine love of the brethren. Love one another from the heart fervently. I got an adjective and I got an adverb. Right in the middle of all this wonderful salvation that I got in Christ, redemption by his blood, born again Christian, got a new life, I'm living. I'm living to also love my brethren. And it's not fake. It's genuine. It's good to tell your brethren, I love you. But it is unfeigned just to say words and you don't have any action behind it. I feel confident in the church here, we love one another with unfeigned love. We know God is always with us, and with brethren can't be, we know our brethren love us. And they love us with passion, and we love one another fervently. That's what we're commanded to do. I'm living now as a Christian to love you genuinely. When the chips are down, you need somebody. You have somebody in your brother and sister in Christ. And we do that with passion, fervently. It's strong. And what amazes me is that in the midst of really praising God's great redemptive work and all the things, what he does, he hits on loving your brethren in a way that is meaningful and helpful. Why are you living? Glorify God. Why are you alive as a Christian? Well, I'm going to love God, all of my being, but I will love you. I will love my brethren with unfeigned love, and I will do so fervently. Let's just pour that a little bit more. I will do so out of a pure heart. Yeah, I got my heart, my life right. But what Paul says in 1 Timothy 1 and verse 5, he said, here's the charge to Timothy. Loving your brethren was very important with God, and of course, in the New Testament church. Of valuing others and always seeking their well-being. And those two things go together. But the end of the charge is love out of a pure heart. It's genuine, and therefore we put everything into it to show we care and love. Out of a pure heart and a good conscience and faith that's unfeigned, that's genuine faith. So we got it anchored in God, we got it anchored in Christ. And so we realize I need to love my brethren out of a pure heart. It's cleansed from sin. It's cleansed from wrong motives. It's not trying to say, I love you in order to take advantage of you. But it's generally there to seek your well-being. So it shouldn't be be abnormal to read this passage in Colossians 1. The reason Paul gives thanks is he says, having heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and the love which you have toward all the saints, they are your brethren. Why? Because of the hope which is laid up for you in the heavens, whereof you heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel. We share something together, brethren, in Christ, that the world does not share with us. They have no hope because they're without God, because they're outside of Christ. You and I have that hope. And we have the insight into what is truly living as we should. And that is to realize we have a hope and we share that hope of heaven together. And that's because we love one another. That leads us to love one another because we share things in common. This is important to me, it's important to you, and therefore we value one another and we'll seek one another's well-being. That's how it works. But if we are not thinking about heaven, we're thinking about our immediate issues, if we think we can gain something like preachers did in the first century, thinking that money and gain was what all about godliness was about, that empty. But when we're genuinely having an unfeigned faith and an unfeigned love, we're living a life that God would have us to live in order to glorify Him. And what it leads to is that we'll have the joy of reaching out and saving others and saving their souls. That will be a very important part of our life because that's what gives us joy. And it's what indeed magnifies God and really shows that we're truly disciples of the Lord. In John 15 and verse 8, he says, herein is my Father glorified. You want to glorify God? Dear believing Christian, here is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit. And so shall you be my disciples. Jesus, as He was involved in with sinners and trying to save their souls, He'd come in contact with them, and that was a no-no among the Pharisaic Jews. So you have to deal with these sinners. And Jesus taught him a threefold parable, driving home one point. Here's the sheep. Got 100 sheep, one goes astray. You go after them. You bring that sheep back. And there's joy in heaven over one soul that repents, more than the 99 that need no repentance. There's your Pharisaic Jews. They don't understand they're in the same condition of being a sinner. But just that one soul. There's joy in heaven. 10 coins, miss one, go get the coin. And there's joy among the angels over one soul that repents. Chapter 15, 6, 7, and 9, and 10. And then he comes to the person. See, a person's not sheep. He's not an animal. And he's not a piece of coin. He's a person. Created in the image of God. And we'll find that as Jesus described that particular coming back of that son, he describes it this way in verse 32. It is meet, it is suitable, it is proper to make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead. No, he's up there, he was in a pig's pen over there. Dead spiritually while he lived, and he came to his senses while he lived. I got better things with my Father than where I am now. He was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. And the Father had been left behind, and the Son went out to waste his substance with riotous living, but the Father was looking for him when he came, wanting him back, wanting him to be found, wanting him to no longer be lost. And we will have that type of heart as we glorify God, knowing he wants the person that's never heard the gospel, he wants them to be saved. But those who have wandered away, he wants them to be saved. And we will realize that's an important part of my life. I want to magnify God. I want that to be my focus. And as Paul tells Timothy, to be consistent in my life, that I'll pay attention to my teaching, what I'm teaching others. And I'll be able to save both myself and them that hear me. Paul says, continue in these things. You take heed to your teaching. Continue in these things. For in doing this thou shalt save both thyself and them that hear thee. There's a joy of saving others for eternity, and there's a joy of meeting the needs of others. In 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, it's remarkable that a church that's going through persecution, that could be a big barrier about freely giving. They don't have a lot of money. Really, they're kind of comparatively poor. But Paul uses them in Macedonia to stir up hearts of love in Corinth. In those first 3 verses, verse 2, how that in much proof of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abound unto the riches of their liberality. They just gave because even though these were things that would maybe hold people back, they overcame that. Why? Because they gave themselves to the Lord, beseeching us with much entreaty in verse 4 of this grace and the fellowship of the ministry of the saints. For this not as we had hoped, they did beyond what we thought they would do, but first gave themselves to the Lord and to us through the will of God. We're to glorify God, and we will give with that kind of heart. And what does Paul say in verse 8? Verse 8. I speak not way of commandment. Got to do it this way. I speak not way of commandment, but as proving through the resurrection, for the earnestness of others, the sincerity also of what? Your love. Your love. We love you, but I don't have anything to offer you, and you do. Well, I don't have much. He didn't have much. Kind of difficult times right now. I know I might need to, that didn't bother them. This grace, this ministry of helping people in a time of need, helping their fellow brethren. And what was so important about that one is the fact that here were a bunch of Gentiles giving money to Jews. No, they were giving money to brethren, like precious faith. And he says, I used them, he just freely admits, I used their earnestness to prove your love. Complete what you said you would do. It's all about love. Galatians 6 and verse 10, the Apostle Paul says, as we have opportunity, let us work that which is good toward all men, and especially toward them that are the household of the faith. There's your Christian, there's your non-Christian, and there you and I are individuals going about our lives. And what are we supposed to do? We're to seek the well-being of our fellow man. That's why you're living. To glorify God and to love others. Genuinely and fervently. And make sure we meet the need. What's so wonderful about the Good Samaritan? He just didn't do it halfway. He made sure that man, from the time he's biting up his wounds to the time he got him into the motel and paid for it, that man was taken care of. That's the type of love we want to see to as we have the opportunity and the means to do so. So I just say glorify God and love others is why I'm living. And if you're not a Christian, maybe you're a young person, you haven't made that step yet. You've learned enough about God. He redeemed you not with money, but through Christ's blood, and He raised Jesus from the dead. We've seen how we indeed become purified from our sins through obeying the gospel and baptism. You've learned that this morning. And if you haven't done that yet, we want to encourage you to do so. Because we've all fallen short of the glory of God. Now it's time for you to say, here's my purpose. I will glorify God, and I will love my brethren. I'll love my fellow man, so that God will be magnified in me in life. And you may be on the other end of the spectrum. That you are very near death, or you're very close to dying. What can you do? Brother Meyer led a song, Safe in the Arms of Jesus. I think that could be a daily prayer. Because it's saying you're thinking about heaven, and that's good. Whatever time of life we are, but especially when you know your days are limited. And you're thinking about safe in the arms of Jesus. And you're depending upon the rock of ages. The time is not a factor with you, God. I trust in you. Help my faith to be strong in you. But what can I do? Well, you can long for the time when you will not be involved with corroding care. See, care this, care that. It corrodes you. God, I'm looking forward to the time there will be not corroding care. There will not be temptations that cause me to sin, because safe in your arms there is no more sin. The person's thinking of heaven. Yes, I have more tears to shed, but I realize I want to go to a place where the more doubts and fears, there's no more doubts and fears that corrode my life. I long for that place. So that's good to be longing for that place. But then he says, help me wait. Having that hope, that's an encouragement. That's what you're preparing for. You can face the moment of your days where there's pain and carrying all those things. But help me wait. Help me endure. Help me wait through those difficult night times. Help me wait until the day dawns, eternal day, on God's eternal heavenly shore. But while I wait, help me glorify you, O God, and help me love others, so you will be magnified. You're dealing with your troubles. You're overriding that with what you know God promises, the Rock of Ages promises. And you're preaching to yourself, help me wait. I don't know why I'm still here. Help me wait. And while I'm waiting, help me be a blessing to others. Are you accountable to God for your life now? You've heard the gospel, and you've heard how we can go through all phases of our life in a way that says, I'm still living. I have another opportunity to glorify God today and to show how much I love others. And you know what? You will never waste your life when you live and die that way. Why not start that route unto heaven by obeying the gospel as we stand and sing? Please come.